Kia ora everybody, my name is Simon Bickler and I'm going to discuss some work I've been doing with my colleagues Ben Davies and Garry simulating seafaring in the past. So why do we model seafaring? The principal reason is the contrast between the importance of seafaring in human history and the limited amount of data that exists to inform on those processes in the deep past. While there have been noteworthy findings of watercraft, rigging and depictions in archaeological contexts, these are only a small number of data points in what was probably a wider variety of adaptations to travel over water, leaving many questions about past voyages of exploration and interaction. Modelling of past seafaring, particularly with computer software, has been one of the few ways these uncertainties have been interrogated systematically. Elements that we have understood well, such as sea levels or view sheds, can be combined with elements we do not, such as sail performance or course awareness, in such a way to explore the potential outcomes from a range of possible histories. The approach is not new, and archaeologists have been using computer-based seafaring modelling since the early 1970s, and today it's a vibrant international effort covering a wide range of topics and places. This was a list Ben Davies and I put together some time ago, and it's already way out of date. Computer simulation requires us to combine knowledge about the environment in which sailors were operating in, vessels that were created and how they performed under different conditions, how navigators actually sailed, and of course the archaeological information we have obtained over the years. All simulations have limitations. These can be environmental, where we focus on a specific area, a limited amount of data that's constantly changing. Different types of simulation can lead to very different types of results. Whether you're dealing with the Pleistocene, modern, and everything in between is also an important factor. Climate change is increasingly an issue that we're focused on. Vessel performance is also variable. They can range from drift, paddled, sailed, and powered. And combining how environmental factors on vessel configuration affects performances is one of the things we're most interested in. Navigators themselves can have all sorts of different types of abilities. They can be focused only on visual, they can have some limited course holding, they can use star navigation, compass navigation, and even GPS navigations in the simulation. Other limitations to do with the simulations themselves can be the black box approach to many of them. It's often difficult to see what's really going on in many of the simulations, and sharing that information makes it difficult to reproduce different simulation results. There's limited access for cooperation and sharing expertise, and we need to improve our understanding of Indigenous knowledge, and in New Zealand's case, Mataranga Māori. Archaeological researchers can contribute from the world, and of course, real sailors. So one of the objectives in a new simulation that we were putting forward was we wanted it to be global in scope, scalable, flexible, interactive, and engaging. We have access to a wide range of data sources. The ones that we're looking at today in the background relate to winds, currents, land, and vessels, all available online, covering a different range of relatively recent 30 to 70 years worth of climate data that's been collected, and modern survey data. What we're interested in is everything from drift sailing all the way through directed navigated sailing. On one hand, it's quite environmentally determined. On the other, it's quite people determined. We can bring in a range of vessel performance data and integrate that into the simulation. Here are some of the wind rosettes relating to sailboats from Manila galleons and voyaging Vaka from Polynesia, which we'll look at a bit later. We also wanted much greater flexibility on the way in which voyages were undertaken. In earlier versions of simulations that I worked on in the early 1990s, we had quite limited range of single stage and double stage voyages that were randomly selected, had some capabilities to do with latitude sailing, but now we can go and send canoes and all sorts of vessels from drift paddling in all sorts of different directions with multi-leg voyages to see how they work out. And this is what we've come up with, virtual Vaka. There are in fact two versions. One is built on R, the open source statistics package, which allows us to have a large number of experiments, as big as your computer's capability is, all sorts of variable configurations, and we can use parallel processing to manage large numbers of voyages. On the other hand, is a modified version of it, built on R Shiny, which is online, and we can use it for testing using the small sets of vessels, and most importantly, make it available for other people to use. And this is what the current user interface looks like. You can see here a global map of the world. You can choose a start point. You can set a whole number of configuration options, number of canoes, the year of data that you want to use, how often you want to send boats out with, and this is what you see at the end. You can zoom in, and this is boats coming out from Cook Islands in a scattered random direction across the Pacific. There's also other views that give you much more advanced capabilities to do with how you affect the land coverage that you use. You can send all sorts of complex voyages out, and you can tweak the performance of navigators, vessels, and even underlying maps. You can do drift voyaging, which a lot of people are interested in. It's not the focus of today's talk, but it's there. But the most important thing is to do with the navigational choices. And you can set a target island, you can tack, you can use star navigation, you can use latitude sailing, which we'll discuss, and you can add in current drifts into the process as well. This is what it looks like. Here's a voyage out from Rarotonga towards Aotearoa, New Zealand, and you can see the pathway of the voyage coming across. You can see the yellow arrow is the direction the boat's trying to sail in. The blue arrow into the position of the boat is the wind direction, so the boat is having to respond to that. And you can see the red arrows, the impact of currents on the daily basis. All of this is calculated on an hourly basis, but shown on a daily basis. Looking more closely, you can sort of see how the boat's tacking into the wind. Tacking usually involves choosing the optimal or closest heading from the desired course, but on occasions you can also tell it to choose a non-optimal tack as well if you want to make better progress into the wind at various times. We've also introduced a form of what we call star navigation based on our readings of the Micronesian ETAC system. This allows you to fix a notional target both outward and back, and canoes can then change their desired direction as they head towards a target. There's a range of options in that, but can be made to be perfect, so a canoe will actually try to target a specific location and make suitable adjustments, much like you could do with compass navigation. Here you can see the star navigation in operation. A canoe is set out from the top of Aotearoa, New Zealand towards Rarotonga. It sails past the curved X but doesn't stop. But as it gets closer and closer, the winds push it further and further north away from Rarotonga. However, the canoe is able to readjust its desired course until it brings itself in towards Rarotonga, although it still requires quite a lot of tacking to make it there. This gives you an example of how that journey would vary with the star navigation on, what we call a positional awareness, so it's able to correct, and if it's not on, in which case it doesn't ever quite make it to Rarotonga and heads well into the remote Oceania. This gives you an example of the degree to which we can adjust the tacking and how it affects the results. So 75 degrees into the wind gives it much better ability than 105, which is closer to where we think some of the canoes may have been able to do, but they can still correct and sail towards Rarotonga, even if their tacking ability is not that great. We also set up one of our favorite experiments, looking at the Manila galleons that went from Central America to the Philippines in the 16th centuries on, because an earlier study by Garcia et al. In 2001 had gone through and processed a whole lot of galleon logs to estimate El Nino patterns in the Pacific over 250 years worth of voyages. What they were looking at is to what degree the wind patterns caused by El Nino would disrupt the trade winds for the southern voyages. And we wanted to do this because we wanted to test whether we could get similar results to them. So here you can see the results of our simulation. Galleons in orange are sailing in winds from the year 2000, which was a relatively neutral, if you like, average year for the Northern Pacific. Galleons in green were sailing in 1997 or El Nino conditions. As you can look closely, that even if the El Nino year galleons got further ahead as they sailed across the Pacific, the galleons sailing in the normal winds would get all the way through about, on average, a week earlier. What would generally happen is that during El Nino years, as they approached Manila, storms would come up and slow them down during that period. This is what Garcia et al. Found, and so we were able to feel confident that we were simulating real conditions for these galleons. While our results with the galleons gave us some confidence regarding the reproducibility of our simulation, we were also interested in the scalability of the simulation. Here you can see on the left the endpoints of 25,000 voyages from Tonga to Aotearoa using wind data from 1990 to 1999 every day through a range of angles, and you can see it creates quite a spread of information. We log every single hourly movement, and so we can process the data in all sorts of different ways in order to understand what's going on, but it's quite challenging to look at this amount of information just from a single experiment. But we can use 70 years worth of data, 30 years worth of current data, decadal current data, multiple angles, varying strategies, varying boat performance, thousands upon thousands of boats, and then process them using R. So finally, I thought I'd give you a glimpse of some of the research Ben and I are doing with our colleague Garry around Māori voyaging around New Zealand in the pre-colonial past. We certainly know Māori were very capable and went to virtually every single island. They were well provisioned, they had a good knowledge, they were able to build very good canoes. So what was the nature and extent of what that sailing and exploration around Aotearoa, New Zealand? So here's an example of one of our unusual simulations, sailing west from the top of the North Island in New Zealand towards Australia, seeing whether they would target Lord Howe Island, which sits in between them, about 570 kilometres, rather than 1,270 kilometres to Australia. We know that the winds are generally favourable in midsummer, but we wanted to know how dependent the success was regarding the bearing that you set out from, how long the voyages took. So we sent out 18,000 boats from a range of angles over the 10-year period, 1990 to 2000. You can hear some of the results, and certainly Lord Howe was able to be found. Moderate success rate if you chose the right target, but the downwind course is risky. It would have been an attractive destination as a staging post, but was apparently not found during Māori exploration. Interestingly, you notice though that if you send the voyages on, Australia represents a big target and was found quite regularly. Looking broadly at some of the results, you can see there's actually quite a range of success rates over the 10-year period we chose. Most peculiarly, 1991 seemed to be a very poor year to sail, and we don't quite know what in particular was bad about that. You could also see that during January and February, success rates were much higher. Comparing that strange result from 91 with a better year in 1998, you can see what happens is the canoes end up not making it to Australia. They hit a lot of counterwinds that mean that they get stranded out in the ocean, regardless of the length of voyage that they actually have to sail. We're also looking at exploring Sub-Antarctic voyages that seem to be popular in the press and building our Pleistocene drift simulations. Sadly, that's all the time we've got to have a look at what Virtual Vaka can do. We're hoping to shift all the code to a GitHub to make it available for other people to come in and give us a hand. But if you're interested in testing it out, the virtual version is available at the website there, but please feel free to contact us if you're interested. Just like to acknowledge all the people that helped us and have a great conference.